So last time I was here, we talked about Playboy. We
That's
talked
right.
about a porno.
We did.
Spider-Man was in Playboy in Japan.
That's right.
We talked about this Bleeding Cool article that said the first appearance of Spider-Man in Japan was in this Playboy issue number 39, I think.
That's right. Issue number 39. And they quoted a blog post by a Matthew Roybal. This guy knows his foreign comics. He is a major foreign comic collector. I know this because he reached out to me after the show. He said he didn't even reach out to Bleeding Cool. He wanted to get in touch with me. And he said, yo, they misquoted my article. There's no link to the article on Bleeding Cool. They butchered it. I read the article. I don't know how they misread this. Like, I have no idea. It literally says in the article, this is the 8th appearance of Spider-Man in Japan. It like literally says it right there, clear as day.
Uh-oh.
So either they didn't read it or they were just working too quick over there. Regardless, it was an error. This is the 8th appearance of Spider-Man in Japan. But this is kind of a fun thing that happened post the showing of these comics on the mic. Matthew Roybal hit me up after the fact. We had a great conversation. He is now kind of one of our sources for foreign comics now. This is a gentleman who was a senior editor for a foreign magazine. They produced actually published two printed foreign comic collector magazines. They're small, short, but still a nice little piece of information that it's been published. And then they actually did a handful of digital ones before they, kind of slowed down and stopped doing it because life happened. This is a very small group of collectors who care about foreign comics. And we had probably a great hour and a half long conversation about foreign comics that we got to get into.
Let's do it.
Okay, so the first thing that I want to talk about is some interesting things. Well, the first time that Spider-Man appeared in a Japanese comic, or at least in a licensed Marvel form, was in the Japanese Playboy comics. Like that is correct. But he appeared in issue number 32 first. Now, Spider-Man was in manga prior to that, but that was non-licensed Marvel properties. That was like their own Spider-Man version, their own stories. I'm talking about licensed Marvel, Romita art in a comic book form in Japan. It was started in issue number 32. But I found out so much other interesting stuff that I just want to kick back to the community, and I want to hear their thoughts because foreign comics, it's definitely not something that is looked at as a goal for a lot of collectors.
We've had a few here, right? Didn't you have like a Spanish first appearance of Punisher or something that was up on No, I'm thinking of a different comic. I thought you had a foreign language first appearance, the yellow Punisher Spider-Man cover. And
we have in the past.
Okay.
We also have had Captain America 100. That's in the back issue bin. We got like the early McFarlane Spider-Man. That's in, I think, Greek.
I remember looking at it and being like, oh, this is cool, but I can't read it. So I just kind of put it back and kept going.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's typically how most people view it. Like, it's a key moment on a book, and we're in like a kind of a special time right now because people are starting to buy these more often. I just saw Illust Illuminati pick one up and post it on Instagram. He's like, yo, I got a Taskmaster that's foreign and I like the cover, so I picked it up. And I think that's a great example of what's happening in the community. It's not that these are looked at as a really serious collector goal. However, people, when they find them and it has a key moment or a character that they really enjoy, they're willing to buy it because typically they're priced a lot less than that key appearance in America. But let's keep this conversation going because I found out from Matthew that there's a lot more to this foreign collector community than meets the eye.
I noticed in our little document that we type notes on for these podcasts, I noticed you had like a quote from him.
I did. I thought this was really good. He said this, Matthew Roybal, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of foreign comic collectors. They just don't know it yet. And that really sunk in because I've been buying foreign comics since I was little. Like I'd find a cool book and I'm like, oh, it's super cheap. Sure. Jeff did it the other week. Oh yeah. First Lobo in another country. Why not? It's affordable. It's cool looking. It's different. It's a little oversized.
Dad's been picking up a lot of Spanish comics.
He has.
Yeah.
So like low key, people have been starting to get into foreign comic collecting. But I wanted to hear from Matthew, like specifically, what got him into this? Because it's one thing to just go from, casual, I'll pick it up if I find it, to I'm hunting for foreign comics. He showed me some of his collection. And it's like foreign comic after foreign comic of stuff I've never seen. And he's like, here's from Japan. This is from Greece. This one's from, South Africa, South America. Here's from Brazil. Like there's so many from the Philippines. And I'm just like, I'm trying to understand, like there's so much passion behind this collecting and I appreciate it, but I'm trying to figure out how do I communicate this to the community? So he dished. He explained it to me. And what I found out was fascinating.
So there's a couple cool terms that you kind of explained to me a little bit before we started here. And the honestly, the easiest one for me to understand to start with is the term sets.
Foreign sets.
Right. So say, for example, you have a whole bunch of different versions of Spawn number 1.
Right.
But you have them in a bunch of different languages.
That's right.
But they're all Spawn number 1.
That's
you
right.
have one in Italian, one in German, one in French, one in Spanish.
And Matthew Roybal happens to have, and apparently he's claiming to be the second person to do this, a complete Spawn 1 set.
Set. Yes, you don't want to say run.
No.
Right, because that implies, multiple different comics in sequence telling a story.
Now, that may not seem pretty big to you, but I want to show you this picture here. How gorgeous does this look?
It gets even cooler when you zoom in.
That's right.
You can see the image is the same, but the text is where things are going to change. The logo is in different colors on different pictures. There's different subtitles and text in different spots all over the cover, but it looks the same and it looks different also, depending on which one you're looking at. It's pretty cool.
Some of these are different sizes too. And he also mentioned too that there is even a little bit of a split in the community of what they would define a set, because for him, he includes not just the various covers and from like different countries of where these come from, he also includes the interiors. And there are foreign comics that have the interior of a comic book, but a different cover advertised. So if there's a Spawn that includes Spawn, like if there's Spawn 1 in a comic book that's foreign, that's inside a magazine, kind of like the Playboy Spider-Man one, would you count that one? Because Spawn 1 isn't on the cover. Well, he does, because that counts. In that country, that's how they produce Spawn. But some collectors only go after the cover appearance. He's a completionist, and that got me excited because I'm seeing correlations here, between completionists in America who are searching for an entire run or every key appearance, real first appearances. So then he showed me this picture of his Star Wars set. And that hit home. I'm like, oh my goodness, look at these books. They're all dated from around the time that this was produced, the original Star Wars comic book, but all over the world. So we're talking sets then. So then I made a mistake. And I said that, man, this is cool. This is like a variant. Like people in the community right now, they go out of their way to buy a 1 in 10 and 1 in 25 because of scarcity, rarity. It's like a variant of a comic. And then he corrected me.
Uh-oh.
He said, we actually moved away from calling these variants because back in the day, again, the history of this is pretty deep because they've been doing this. The foreign comic collector has been strong like as a community for over a decade. And I'll get into how crazy it gets here in a second. But he said that they moved away from calling them variants after they kind of got slack on the CGC forums. And they're like, these aren't variants, because variants are typically considered something that like came out soon after the fact, either at the same time or a relatively recent amount of time. Some of these came out soon after, some of these came out years after. So he said that they've adapted the term from the book collector market, editions.
So like the Italian edition of Spawn number 1.
Exactly.
Okay.
So these aren't just reprints. Some of these, and these terms matter because there's a reason why no one cares about foreign comics right now, at least the majority of people.
It makes sense because I think if you said the Italian variant of Spawn number 1, for me, in my mind, that means like the cover is in Italian, but the inside is the exact same as the normal, the American one that we've had.
Or if you say reprint, you think of a facsimile or a image first kind of thing. It's just it's just reading material. But these things matter. Why do they matter? Well, because of the next reason why he explained why it's like so intriguing and kind of a obsessive thing to collect. Like these guys are serious about this. It's because of the scarcity and the history that these comic books have. So when you dive into it, he told me of a couple different terms that the foreign comic collector community has kind of coined. The first one he talked about was local indigenous bias. We're talking about scarcity. You got to talk about why they're scarce. We know about why American comics are scarce, but kind of you kind of dive into it, we're not really talking so much about silver, bronze, and modern because, like, honestly, if you want to get a Spider-Man 300 or something in any grade, you can find it, you know? So yeah, it's scarce to get it in high grade, like 9.8, right? Really hard. You're going to pay a lot of money for it, but you can find it.
Yeah.
So it's almost like we need a different term for this when we're talking about American comics. Basically, Silver Age and New. When you go gold, we know why those ones are harder and harder to find. But foreign comics, can you explain to us what local indigenous bias is? Because we have some phrases that kind of sum up how foreign comics became so scarce.
Yeah, this was another one that was new to me because apparently people in other places where there are translated versions of these comics that come out, sometimes they are more partial to the American versions of the comics instead of the ones that have been produced in their own language that they can read naturally.
So, for example, he used Spawn in the Philippines. He said specifically that in the Philippines, when Spawn came out, there was a focus on the American Spawn comic. That's what they wanted to collect. And although the Philippines produced Spawn comic books in mass, and they could have gotten them at that time, they wanted to collect the American version. So a lot of what happened is people read the comic in their own language. They didn't care to really take care of the book. Probably didn't bag and board a lot of them. And a lot of them didn't really get into collections. So in that particular case, Rarity ended up being the book that they didn't think would be valuable long-term.
That's never good.
It's never good. And what you also have is the flip side of this happening in reverse. He gave an example about South Africa, about how in early days when they were trying to uncover foreign comic books, keep in mind, comic fam, a lot of these covers that you can find on the internet right now, they're difficult to find as is. Like, it's not easy to find catalogs. You don't have the Gerber Journal of foreign comics where you just have everything listed. You can find a lot on the internet, but we're talking a decade ago, 5 years ago, where a lot of this stuff wasn't happening. So how did you get this information? You literally had to go on websites that were in a different language to try and find information from comic books that you didn't know existed. And he told me the way that they did this was offering a financial incentive to individuals in their particular country and said, hey, if you can find this cover in your language, I'll give you $30 just for the picture. Help me find it. Because
just for a picture of it, not even the comic itself?
Oh, just for the picture. Because for one, they don't know if it exists and it's in Greek, and good luck finding something if you don't read Greek. You know, if you're going on Greek forums on the internet looking for Greek comic collectors.
They say Google Translate works, but Google Translate doesn't work.
Well, and he said that they were using Google Translate a lot of the time to figure this stuff out. So
every time I've tried that, it never works.
So in response to the question about the opposite happening from the local indigenous bias, he said this happened on the flip side as well, specifically in South Africa when they were looking for certain books down there. They were told by collectors like, oh no, we don't have these out here. They're gone. And then he would hear from other collectors, no. They're here, they're collected, and they're protected. They don't want them to leave the country. There are pockets, there are certain countries of collectors that are like, they take pride in their foreign comic, so they hunt them down and they try not to let them leave the country.
Like just lock them up in a vault?
Basically.
Right.
So it goes deep. And I find it fascinating because each of these different countries that produce these comics have their own stories.
Right.
Yeah. And some of these stories are honestly more interesting than some of the comic books that we collect for grade alone. And I'll just leave you with this, comic fam. He mentioned Brazil. Okay. And shout out Matthew Robert. Thank you so much for chatting with us and giving us this information. I'm excited. If the community wants to hear more about foreign comics, I'm interested.
Me too.
I'm interested in having more conversations with him. If you have a question, a comment, put them in the description, in the comment section below, and we'll bring this up to Matthew. He'll probably dish more about this. But he mentioned Brazil. He's like, Brazil's a freaking rainforest, man. And he said that he looked up information online. He was able to uncover that as much as 10 to 15% of the Brazilian population in the 70s had air conditioning.
So nobody had air conditioning.
Basically,
right?
No one had air conditioning in an incredibly humid area with comic books that were hyper scarce. And there is tin in the staples of those particular comic books. So you're talking rust. You're talking water damage. You're talking about something that people looked at as garbage basically back then. Like, this is for kids, you know, it's just buy it on the stand. Just like here in America, where people didn't really respect
Right.
the collectability and the investment of these comics because they didn't think they would be worth very much back then. Well, think about that. We're talking one country that experienced all of these types of things that create this scarcity and this collectible. I think it's incredibly intriguing.
Yeah, this feels like just the surface of the potential here is pretty astonishing. Like the amount of stories that could possibly be told in foreign comics.
We'll have to get into it, and I look forward to doing it with the community.